Hello everybody, can you hear me?
Yeah.
We know that there are still a few people outside who are making their way in, but in the tradition that I like to follow, we like to honor those who have showed up on time, and so we're going to begin. For those who don't know me, my name is Stephanie Smith. I'm the president of the BC Government and Service Employees Union. We represent 73,000 workers in the province of British Columbia in just about every sector of the economy that you can imagine, and we're very proud to do so. I'd like to begin this evening by acknowledging that we are on the traditional unceded shared territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. And while this expression and this acknowledgement is an expression of respect and recognition, it is also deeply relevant to the topic that we're going to be talking about tonight. Michael Hudson's work reveals how some profit enormously from the rents and the interests that come from property and natural resources. But as Indigenous title and rights remind us, in the case of British Columbia, this profiting has come from property that belonged to others and was never ceded. Today, Vancouver is rated as having the worst housing affordability in Canada, and the numbers of homeless and the underhoused are increasing. In 2006, 19% of single-family homes in the city of Vancouver cost $1 million. Today, 100% of single-family homes are over $1 million. And we're facing a crisis, and we can't afford to keep these trends continuing. Affordable housing is a fundamental part of well-being of individuals, families, and communities. And without it, everything from the decision to start a family to the ability of employers to attract and retain workers in our region is being negatively impacted. And meanwhile, communities are weakened because our young people are being forced to leave these areas to find alternatives that are less costly. Debt levels are soaring for first-time buyers, as well as those dependent on the increasingly expensive rental market. The real estate crisis, bound up with high levels of consumer and household debt, and the advancing inequality in BC, pose a significant threat to social and economic stability in our province. And with so much at stake, it's no surprise that housing affordability has been named as one of the top concerns in the upcoming provincial election. And in a survey of our own members, they also included housing and childcare costs as one of their top concerns. So it's time for all government stakeholders, local, provincial, and federal, to take concrete steps towards solutions. And we're extremely pleased tonight to be hosting renowned economist Michael Hudson in Vancouver to contribute his expertise and perspective on how this can be done. In just a moment, I'm going to invite BCGU Treasurer Paul Finch to introduce Michael, but before he does, I want to thank the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives BC office for coordinating this event with us. CCPA, yes, please, yeah, round of applause. CCPA Director Seth Klein and economist Iglika Ivanova are going to lead us in a panel discussion later on this evening. And I also want to thank our sponsors, Vancity, the Jim Green Foundation, the UBC School of Community and Regional Planning, SFU City Program, SFU School of Public Policy, and the Tyee for their support as well. Like all of you, I'm really looking forward to this evening's talk and the discussion that's going to follow, and certainly we invite all of you to participate in that discussion. So as you made your way in, hopefully you grabbed your cards that you can write your questions down, and we're going to collect them after Michael speaks and ask him for some responses. So Thank you again very much for joining us this evening, and I'm now going to turn it over to BCGEU Treasurer Paul Finch.
Hi, good evening, everyone. It's great when you're able to sell out the Rio for an economist. I think that's I'm not sure that's happened before. When I asked Dr. Hudson how he'd like to be introduced, he said as briefly as possible, which I think speaks greatly to his character and to the wealth of the work that he's done over many years of dedicating himself to good analysis, but also analysis that benefits people, that fundamentally helps people. I want to thank as well, in addition, a lot of the logistical organization behind this was done by a few people: Amber Rudick, Gene Stevens, Roman Barnett, and a number of people at BCGEU. So thank you very much. There's too many to name. I also want to thank Common Ground Magazine for their help in promoting the event as well. It was deeply appreciated. Michael Hudson is a rare intellect and somebody who has spent a tremendous amount of time analyzing economic patterns, but has also carved out kind of a niche in understanding how economic structures work. And in that respect, he's authored many books, The Bubble and Beyond, Killing the Host, Super Imperialism, a wide swath of books, but as well, he also was fundamental in developing a strain of archaeology that looks at the economies of ancient Near East societies. And if you haven't checked that out, it's actually, and if you're a huge nerd like me, it's actually it's a good read. So, but he brings that historical lens and that context. And why that's important is because being able to thread that context of the progression of human economies throughout the ages situates us in a place that gives us a better understanding of how we got to where we were and where we can go. So I would like to introduce, and so I'll give a warm welcome to Dr. Michael Hudson.
Well, I'm very impressed by how many of you are here. I can't see any of you because of the lights. I feel like the last time I was interrogated by the FBI, something like that. But you look like rebels. And I'm sure that's why you're here, because what's happening in Vancouver is almost the opposite. Mike? Maybe it should be in front of me. That way. Into it. Oops.
Right in front.
Yeah. A little lower. Give me. Do you mean that my voice did not carry enough? Was that the point? Oh dear. Well, we were in a very noisy bar before, and I'm afraid my voice is gone for the night. What's happening in Vancouver is almost the opposite of everything you read in the economic textbooks, which is why I don't call myself an economist anymore. Since 1973, I've called myself a futurist, because that doesn't mean really anything at all. And an economist is someone who tells you the economy can get richer by making the population poor and more competitive, and you just have to squeeze labor and you'll get richer in no time. And that's basically what's happening in Europe, and it's creating the kind of seeming internal contradiction that you're having in Vancouver today. Most people traditionally think of rising real estate prices as a reflection of a society that's getting richer. And from World War II, the ending of that, really for about 50 years, most Canadians and Americans and Europeans, the middle class got most of its wealth from the rising price of its real estate. And the reason the prices rose was because people were earning more, they were more productive, and there was an overall economic surplus. And real estate prices pretty much until the mid-1980s kept pace with the growth of earnings. And you could say that rising housing prices were a reflection of the overall prosperity. People could afford to buy houses, and in fact, if they would buy a house in America, the United States, the typical mortgage was a 30-year mortgage that would be self-amortizing, pay itself off, and the banks would not make a mortgage if it absorbed more than 1/4 of the borrower's income, so that they wanted to make sure that housing didn't take more than about 25% of the income they made. That was a rule of thumb. And also, the buyers had to somehow save up 20% of the down payment so that they were solvent enough to be able to leave the banks with some leeway. All of that has changed since the financial system really took off and became decoupled from the economy at large, to a point where in Vancouver today, real estate prices are not a reflection of prosperity. They're actually making your city poorer, as Stephanie pointed out in her introduction. So how can it be that a real estate boom goes hand in hand with impoverishing many of the families, and even most of the families that live here? Last night, Paul took me on a walk through some of the main streets of Vancouver, the commercial streets, and I noticed maybe 1/3 of every block either was for rent, or had just been developed, or there was a going out of business sale. So obviously the real estate boom here is traumatizing the whole structure of the city. So I want to talk about, there's not a real estate bubble here, but I want to talk about the curse of rising real estate prices. It's like the oil curse of Norway, or countries that are very rich off oil or very rich off natural resources. The resources tend to be all siphoned off by a wealthy class, and then they're bought and sold to buyers, with banks putting up all the money. And behind every real estate bubble really is the banking system. And it's almost impossible to think of real estate without linking it to the banks, because 80% of bank loans in the United States, and I think Canada also, take the form of mortgage loans. Banks make their money by finding people willing to go into debt. And for 50 years after World War II, people were willing to go into debt, pay everything they could on a home, because they felt that they could always sell it to somebody else as the economy's growing. But the economy's not growing anymore. In the United States, since Barack Obama was elected in 2008, the economy has shrunk for 95% of Americans. All of the economic growth has accrued to only 5% of the population, and that 5% is largely the finance, insurance, and real estate sector, not the population at large. So what's happening in Vancouver is very much like what's happening in Manhattan and London and a few other cities. The center of the city in London now is, it's not a real estate bubble, because 80% of the properties in central London are owned without a mortgage. So the banks haven't really done it. It's a flight capital center, largely for Russian and post-Soviet capital, but investors all over the world have put their money into London, because if you're a foreign real estate owner, you don't have to pay any capital gains. In England, a foreign real estate owner is an Englishman who holds the real estate through the Isle of Man or some foreign bank account, basically. So basically, the speculators don't have to pay. So at night, although central London may have a busy street life for the stores and the restaurants, the residential areas are dark, because the owners aren't there. They're empty apartments. Same thing in Manhattan. Whole sections of Manhattan that have been developed largely to sell to foreign millionaires are dark at night. Well, that is the danger that Vancouver faces as more and more foreigners buy for speculative purposes or for investment purposes the real estate in the center of the city. The local people, the Londoners, the New Yorkers, and the Vancouverites can't afford to live there anymore. They're actually forced out of the city. In London, if you look at job offerings in the British press, the job offerings come with a guarantee, say, including tickets. And one friend of mine in Latvia thought they were tickets to soccer games, but they were tickets for the railway so that they can afford to get into London for the job, because they realize that they can't afford, the people who get jobs in London can't afford to live there. And what kind of a city is it that essentially lets all the benefits of its growth, all of the increase in the wealth, at least the asset value of the real estate rise, and somehow the city doesn't benefit? It's turned into a kind of curse, and you have that not only here in Vancouver, you have it in whole continents like Australia. The price of housing has gone up so high that Australia is unable to be a manufacturing center. It's unable to produce goods and services, because if you can afford to pay for a home to live in Australia, you have to earn such a high income that your employer cannot compete with exporters in other countries. And I discussed this in Canberra with the head of the Australian Central Bank, and he said, well, we really don't need industry. We actually don't need 90% of our population, because we're very fortunate. We live in a nice neighborhood, the neighborhood of China, and they're buying our iron ore, they're buying our others, and we can balance our payments and pay the banks really without industry at all. And I said, well, what's going to happen to the Australians? He said, well, that's not in our equation. And I guess you could say that's not in the equations that economists use when they say Vancouver must be rich, look at its real estate, and they don't see how rising real estate prices can actually make an economy poor. And that's happened in the United States. It's happened to such an extent that the United States, if workers got everything that they consumed, all of their food and clothing and transportation, for nothing, they still couldn't compete with foreign countries, because in the United States, all of the mortgages are government guaranteed. Otherwise, the banks won't make them, because banks don't take risk. It has to have government guaranteed. The government will guarantee a mortgage up to 43% of the borrower's income. Over and above that, you have about maybe 10% of the income spent on other bank loans, credit card debt, student loans, car loans. You have 15% of wages taken off the top for Social Security and Medicare, and maybe 10% more in income and sales taxes. So only about 30% of the average homeowner's family's budget is available to buy the goods and services they produce. So no wonder there's a shrinkage. In New York City, the situation down the main streets is much worse than it is in Vancouver. In New York University and Greenwich Village, what was long the main industrial street, 8th Street, more than half the commercial properties at ground level are empty for sale. Nobody's in them at all, because people are not able to buy what they used to buy. The restaurants in New York are all closing. The figures last month came out for business bankruptcies in the United States, and they've risen very sharply. So the economy has not ever really recovered from the financial crash that occurred in 2008. The promise was to write, when President Obama was running, was to write down debts to the real value of the real estate, so that people could afford to live in the homes that they'd taken out, that the banks had lent much too much money on. Instead, Obama saved his constituency, the banks, not the economy, and that's the story of the economy since. The rest of the economy cannot function with the level of debt that has occurred. You can look at Greece as an example of a country that's completely debt-strapped. And if you understand the dynamics of debt deflation, then you can begin to see what's happening in Vancouver. I was asked today by the CBC, do we have a real estate bubble here? Because usually, many people think that if real estate goes up, it must be because banks are lending more and more and becoming more reckless. But that's not the case in Vancouver. I think there are a number of reasons the property's going up so much. One reason is people from Europe, Asia, and American hedge funds are buying property for all cash. because they can make a much bigger return on real estate than they can make in the stock or bond markets. So if somebody has 100% equity, no debt at all, there's not a chance of the bubble being pricked by defaults on mortgage debt that lead to a general crash. But what you have is something much worse than a bubble. You have what I call debt deflation. You have the price of real estate going up so high that in order to live here, people have to take on so much debt that they can't afford to go to your restaurants or shop in your stores or to spend money in what's supposed to be the circular flow in the economic textbooks, where workers will spend the wages they get on buying what they produce. This is the idea of Henry Ford paying his workers $5 a day in the 1920s so that they could afford to buy the Model A or Model T Fords that he was producing. That's not the case anymore. Car sales in the United States are way down. People are buying used cars. Banks are cutting back on automobile loans because the rate of default on automobile loans is soaring almost as much as the rate of default on student loans. So you have the economy is stretched by debt, and instead of debt reflecting the ability of the economy to pay, it's taken on a life of its own. The financial system is decoupled from the real economy, and people tend to think that it just helps grease the wheels of commerce, but it's not greasing the wheels of commerce. It's not only sand in the gears, but it's just a heavier and heavier burden. It's like driving a car with the foot on the brake, and every recovery since World War II in the United States or Canada has been weaker and weaker than the previous recovery, because every recovery has resulted in a much larger debt overhead, and people have to pay more and more of the debt, and they can't afford really to help the economy recover. So the problem is, what can Vancouver do to make this value of its real estate a benefit instead of the kind of curse that it is? Instead of squeezing family budgets, what can you do to help? Well, an example is I've come across recently is a discussion in Vancouver about how to finance public transportation system. And I'm appalled to see that Vancouver may make the same mistake that New York City and London made. When London built the Jubilee line, which was the tube line that goes from the center of London to the financial district, it cost about £6 billion. Building these tube stations all of a sudden increased the value of property along the routes by $12 billion. So London could have recovered all of this value by issuing a bond against and capturing the windfall gain to the property that occurred all along the Jubilee line. Same thing in New York. In January, they opened the 2nd Avenue subway, most expensive subway in the world, $6 billion for 4 stations along the very crowded Lexington Avenue on the Upper East Side, where most of the wealthy people live. Now, the $6 billion, almost immediately, the landlords raised the rents on people living on 2nd Avenue, 3rd Avenue, 1st Avenue, and the property values went up. New buyers would buy condominiums or buy whole buildings financed by the bank loans. The banks got rich, making larger and larger loans to people who wanted to live where they could get a subway to work and not be all crowded in on the old line that was the Lexington Avenue line that was near. The city could have financed all of this out of a windfall gains tax on this property levied over a 10-year period or longer. Instead, what they did, the city borrowed money and paid the bondholders for going into debt, and they raised the prices of subway fares for everyone else in New York City. So if you're in Queens or Brooklyn or on the west side of Manhattan, you have to pay higher and higher fares to pay for the extension of a subway that has made real estate developers and landlords along the 2nd Avenue line much, much richer. That's not fair. There's no concept of who are the beneficiaries of the real estate boom and who are the victims. Because if you have a rising real estate price, this is not a win-win game. It does not mean that people are getting richer because now they can sell their houses for more, because look at the position from the children of the generation of the sellers. How are they going to be able to afford to buy a house or afford to live in the city? They're essentially being expropriated from the city in order to create benefits that accrue to a few large banks and a few real estate developers and promoters. That's why, if you look at the skyline of Vancouver, the tallest buildings are the bank buildings. They have the position that used to be performed by temples in all of Western civilization, from Sumer and Babylonia through the Middle Ages. But instead of the temples of the past, you have temples of finance now. And it's obvious to look at the prosperity that somehow all of this wealth that people think is making a sign of Vancouver's richness isn't a sign of that at all. It's a sign that the banks have been willing to make larger and larger loans against property. And the basic rule of thumb is that property is worth however much a bank will lend it against it. And as banks loosen their living standards and lend more and more, people are going to have to pay the price, or else not buy and live further out, and spend a few hours a day in added transportation. And having driven in Vancouver traffic, I can see that that might not be the most desirable thing to do. So that's part of the curse of a rising real estate bubble. Another thing that could be done to slow things is a capital gains tax. Vancouver, or Canada, and England are different from the United States. There's no tax on the windfall gains. So in the United States, if you look at the national income and product accounts, Donald Trump and other developers, the real estate sector as a whole pays all of the rental income to the bank. In other words, suppose you want to buy an office building. You go to the bank, and there are other people who also want to buy an office building. And people bid each other to buy an office building, just as home buyers will go to an auction for a house. And the winner of the auction is the person who's willing to pay all of the rental income to the bank to cover the mortgage charge. Now, why do they do this? They're willing to do it because they're in it for the capital gains. Capital gains in America are taxed only at a fraction of earned income. So the tax system favors people who make their money not by earning income, but by getting a free lunch on asset price inflation, on banks lending more and more, indebting the economy more and more, because that's what banks produce. They don't produce loans as much as they produce debt. And the production of debt is what's increasing the prices and creating the increased price of the capital gain. If the government doesn't collect the capital gain, then people are going to spend much more than actually the rental value of the property, and that's what was happening in the year 2008. People would actually pay more than the rent because they were looking for the proverbial greater fool. And that's a dynamic that's been occurring for over 100 years. In 1923, Thorstein Veblen wrote a book, Absentee Ownership. You may know Veblen from the concept of conspicuous consumption and the theory of the leisure class. But he was also an analyst of how industrial capitalism was turning into something different, into finance capitalism. And he saw that the root of what people call finance capitalism is real estate. And he said that every small town in America, and he could have said every big town too, can be looked at as a real estate project. The objective of the real estate developers is to tax the population as a whole, to spend money on increasing amenities, on public services, public transport system, water and sewer, parks, museums, schools, and all of this being a public booster is to increase the price of property so they can create a booming neighborhood and sell it at a higher price. And it's all an exercise in finding, as Veblen put it, finding a sucker to buy. But it's really trying to convince people that they can make money by going into debt and treating property, treating housing, and treating real estate not as a place to live, not as a place to do business, but really an investment good. Now, last month, the United Nations came out with a whole report on that, saying that this has transformed real estate into something very different from what textbooks talked about. They've transformed it into a vehicle for saving. So if you're a Russian kleptocrat and have managed to buy natural resources, oil, gas, diamonds, electric utilities, aluminum companies, virtually for nothing by being part of an insider gang, the first thing you want to do is get your money out of the country. So that it'll be safe and the government can't say, wait a minute, you've stolen that, get it back. So all of this money floating around the world in offshore banking centers and elsewhere, they want to buy property at various places, and this is the money that's coming into New York, central London, Vancouver, bidding up the prices. And if there's any group of people that does not deserve to be enriched at public expense, it's that class, and yet that's the class that Vancouver's tax laws are favoring. And that's the class that that is being pushed here. And the question is, how did they ever get so many wage earners, so many union members, so many families to think that somehow it's the job of a city government to make the real estate speculators and investors and the banks richer and richer and richer, because that's what they're doing. Well, what they've done is what I call junk economics. It's a kind of Orwellian vocabulary that makes white black and vice versa. And they've somehow convinced people, like I think the Republicans said in the presidential campaign last year, that, well, no poor man ever gave me a job. And the implication is that the rich people, the speculators, call themselves job creators because they're so rich. But they're not job creators. If a corporate raider buys the money at 1 or 2% from a bank to buy a corporation whose stock yields 7 or 8%, he doesn't want to employ labor. He wants to lay off the labor force. He wants to loot the company. He wants to either take the pension fund and use the pension fund to pay the bank, or to threaten the workers saying, I'm going to declare bankruptcy and wipe out the pension fund unless you agree to give up your pension plan and shift to a much lower pension plan. That's been happening throughout the United States in company after company, industry after industry, and somehow the labor unions have not fought back against this. It's as if they've talked about identity politics, but the one kind of identity that's left out in identity politics are people who have to work for a living and earn a wage and actually are workers. And I think that's one of the reasons why the last American election went to Donald Trump. He was the only person who was saying, look, the economy's in a mess. And everybody knew that. And there's a tendency to think that if somebody knows the economy's in a mess, they must want to solve it. Unfortunately, that was not logically following. And he wanted to make money off the mess. And there's a lot of money to be made off a mess. You have had 10 million Americans have their homes foreclosed. Blackstone made a fortune by buying up homes all throughout the country that had been defaulted on, turned them into rental housing, and doubled the money year after year. So the way to make money fastest is on an economy that's being looted. And that's why Adam Smith said the rate of interest is often highest in countries going fastest to ruin. And you could say, I guess, that the the rate of property gains and real estate gains that somehow are left in private hands are often highest in economies going fastest to ruin, because that's what ruins economies. Imagine what Vancouver could be like if it would say, okay, we're fortunate enough to live in a very good location. Our province, British Columbia, is rich in natural resources. We can somehow charge a land tax on this rising value that foreigners want to buy here. They want to buy here because we're underpricing our real estate and we don't tax it. And banks are lending here because so much real estate value is available to pay as interest instead of paying tax. Many people think that all taxes are bad because they don't like to pay their personal income taxes. And personal income taxes are a burden, but some taxes are good. And even Milton Friedman, the free marketer, said the one kind of tax that was good was a tax on unearned income, on economic rent, and on capital gains. And instead, the tax system is favoring exactly these gains. So it's as if the whole economy is being created backwards, and it doesn't have to be this way. Hong Kong is the main example of a city that finances all of its city revenues from the real estate tax. And yet the real estate prices are going up so rapidly there that one Chinese billionaire I know said that he was too embarrassed to go to Hong Kong anymore because all the people he met had $6 billion, and it just made him feel small. Yet the whole city is self-financing by a real estate tax. Now the fact is, there's this real estate, it's called a land tax, but it doesn't capture anywhere near the value of the land rent. Suppose Vancouver were to do what countries for thousands of years did and base the whole tax system on real estate. There would be so much money coming in that not only could the city pay for public amenities to make Vancouver just a gem of a city to live in, but it would have a dividend. The vast increase in commercial real estate property prices would produce such a property tax dividend every year that it could be a citizen's dividend, and you could distribute it to the lower income citizens so that they could afford to pay the rents to actually continue to live in Vancouver. There are a number of other technical solutions to this that I have that I could go over in the question time, and I want to give basically just the basic principles of what I want to say, and that is every kind of a gain in wealth or a gain in property prices, there are beneficiaries and there are victims. And the question is, who's going to be the beneficiary of all of this rising real estate prices, and who are going to be the victims? It's easy to see the victims. Stephanie mentioned that at the beginning when she said there homelessness, there are people who can't afford to live here, there are people who are having to live in the suburbs and drive in, and there are the stores that I saw all being empty along the commercial streets. So the fact is that the banks and the real estate developers have got together to somehow convince the policymakers that their state and local and national policy should favor the wealthy investors, not the population at large. And that can only occur because the population at large doesn't really have an alternative, and it doesn't have an alternative because the whole way of teaching economics has changed radically since I was in school. At least they had the history of economic thought when I went to school 50 years ago for the PhD. They don't have that in the economics curriculum anymore. All they have is mathematics, basically. So you can mathematize unrealistic economics, and if you look at the textbooks of Nobel Prize winners like Paul Samuelson or Bill Vickery, they say, we're not talking about reality. The judgment of the criterion for judging the excellence of an economic theory isn't reality. It's whether the assumptions are internally consistent. Well, here we are in a movie theater. That's what one should do to judge a movie. I'm sure you go to movies and you say, wait a minute, the plot couldn't have happened that way. Wait a minute, something's wrong. The character wouldn't have done that. You're not allowed to ask that of economics because they say that's exogenous. That's an economist word for that's reality. It doesn't fit into our theory. We're talking about theory, not how the world works. And so how are people to be trained in thinking about this? The fact is that you guys out there are the only people that are able to look at your own living conditions and look at around you and say, here is how the world works. Here's how reality is. It's not in the textbooks, and somehow you have to translate what you see into enough economic action so that it becomes political. Because ultimately, this is going to be political. 100 years ago, it was political. In England, the whole fight was over whether to tax the landed aristocracy that lived generation after generation on land that the warlords had conquered. And you may know the England was invaded in 1066 by William the Conqueror. And the first thing that the Norman overlords did was to create, in 20 years, they created the Domesday Book, and that was a list of how much land rent in the form of crops every farm and every sector of England could carry. And they spoke French. They looked down on the English speakers, and essentially the rent was for paying the cost of the crown so that it could go to war and conquer more lands and more lands. And that's how they conquered Canada and Australia and did the same thing, and America, and did the same thing over here. But in North America, there was always a massive corruption, insider deals, and if you look at the great American fortunes, they were all insider political deals. And if I look at Vancouver, and I'm looking at how does people really get filthy rich in Vancouver, you make an insider political deal. You have a huge forests, and people have been explaining to me that the wood you have, the forests, it's given away. It's very much like Russian privatization, which they call gravitization over there. You have to increase the English language once in a while to take account of the new developments. And so you're giving away your natural resources instead of using them as the fiscal base that could make all of you citizens of Vancouver live in a wonderfully high style. The money's there. Why shouldn't it go to you instead of going to the banks and the real estate developers? It just doesn't make sense to me. Maybe I'd rather deal with a lot of questions because I think I've said enough controversial things, so I'd rather leave the rest of the discussion up to questions to go after.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Seth Klein with Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives with Iglika Ivanova here. Thank you, Michael. So I think we've started to get a few of the cue cards, and more of them are going to be collected. And we're going to share the tasks of moderating the questions with Michael. Maybe just while we're waiting for more of the cue cards to arrive, I want to just maybe make a couple quick comments. I mean, I think there's so much in what you said and in your work that captures these trends that we're experiencing here. When you talk about the curse of rising real estate, it's certainly true for a long time for those who were lucky enough to be property owners here. You know, year after year, people would get their property assessments and they'd feel terrific that they were becoming richer and richer. And then in just the last few years, something shifted. It started to become apparent to people that something was wildly out of control and that their children weren't going to be able to live here. and it had become a curse in some way, and the zeitgeist shifted.
It's not a natural law. It doesn't have to be that way. It's a result of policy.
Well, let me just start with that as a first question then. So we have an election in a month. Imagine there's a new government and they pull you back to town to advise them on how to cool the real estate market and what the policy instruments would be. What would you tell them?
Well, the first time I was in Vancouver was 40 years ago, and I came with the Science Council of Canada. I was a financial advisor to the Canadian government at the time. We got to, they had the big meeting in what was, at that time I was told, Canada's cultural center, the Aquarium. And I was told that the way to rise in Vancouver society was to endow a fish tank and get your name for the fish tank. And they had a big bar for all of us, very well stocked, right in the middle of a big pool with sharks. And the mayor of Vancouver welcomed us, and he said, there's just been an election here. And before there were socialist sharks, but now there are capitalist sharks. And he was and we were almost lying on the floor with tears coming out of it. We were laughing so hard. And that's really what happened. The election, you have capitalist sharks now, not socialist sharks. And the question is, how do you get those socialist sharks back into the tank?
What are some of the mechanisms that you would recommend for government?
Number one, a land value tax. And Vancouver made great strides with that in the 40 years ago. And we have one of the authors of that, Bob Williams, here, as a matter of fact. And if you would have had the tax policy that was in place then, everybody in the world would want to live in Vancouver. You would be the model, along with Hong Kong, of a city, how to do it right. And you would have so much money from this tax that the housing prices would not have gone up. The rental value would go up. People would be more able to pay higher rental income in Vancouver because it was such a prosperous city. But instead of paying this rent to the banks, to bid up the price of property, it would be paid to the government, and if the government got a land value tax, it wouldn't have to tax your income, you wouldn't have a sales tax, and the city could spend this money on urban amenities and probably pay a citizen's dividend, and you'd be the model for the world.
Sure. Okay, I'll move on to some more concrete questions from the audience. The first one I have here is about commercial real estate. So in commercial real estate, landowners reap all the increases in property value and then pass on the tax increases on tenants. This is currently gutting the small retail sector, and that's why you're seeing empty storefronts. What are some steps that we can take to change this?
That kind of contract should not be permitted. Very simple. This means if the tenants have to pay all of the tax, you're giving a free lunch. This law it should be called the free lunch law. It's how to make millionaires who don't have to work. Is that what you want to produce? I mean, that's, I don't think any religion in the world, any social theory, any political party ever would have dared to come through with that, but that is exactly the policy that every political party and that's being neoliberalized these days is promoting. So that shouldn't be there. And the tax should of course be levied on the owner, not on the tenants. Why would you want to kick the tenants out and empty out the buildings for everything? There used to be bookstores on 8th Avenue that I talked about near New York University in Greenwich Village. Around the 1970s, all the bookstores were replaced by shoe stores because bookstores couldn't make enough money to pay the rents, and the shoe stores could. And now they're all vacant, and there are no stores. So that's, there are certain kind of businesses that you don't want to charge a very high rent for, and you want to sort of fix the limits, just like in almost every city of America, certainly New York, you have subsidized housing for artists. You should have subsidized housing for maybe drugstores, for essentials. You want to provide the essentials at as low a price as possible. You don't want to leave opportunities for price gouging, and that's what's happened.
I want to ask you about how we're kind of, it feels to me like we're trapped in this paradox, and I'm looking for some advice about how we politically find our way out. That we have all of these people who lucked out as property owners, who have become unearned millionaires. And when you look at our property taxes and our taxes overall in British Columbia compared to the rest of the country, they're low. We should have lots of room to increase taxes. And yet nobody feels that way. They don't feel that way precisely because of what you were describing before, which is that they're so in debt on their mortgages and paying so much in their housing, they're squeezed, and they don't feel like they have any room to move. And if their property taxes went up, they wouldn't be able to afford to live here and would have nowhere else to move to. So how do we get out of where we're stuck?
Well, there are two answers to that. Number one, if you have a property tax, then you don't have to impose an income tax. Every dollar that is collected in a land value tax, you can cut for income tax. So most families would end up the beneficiaries of this. Yes, they'd have to pay higher homeowner taxes, but they'd be paying so much less in income taxes and in local sales taxes that they'd come out ahead. Now, of course, this isn't true of all families. There'd be some retirees and old people. We had this discussion in Latvia about 10 years ago. And the solution is, if somebody's retired, you don't want to kick anybody out of their home because they can't afford to pay the tax. So you say, okay, for a given period, a decade, say, or however long you live there, we're going to leave the tax exactly as it is that you have to pay every year. However, we're going to levy the tax as in arrears so that when you die or move to Florida or do whatever Vancouverans do when they get old, we're going to then collect the back tax that we didn't collect out of the sales proceeds of the house. So it'll all be, you can handle it that way. You don't have to kick anybody out. You can adjust it to various conditions. You can have a layered tax. You can tax owner-occupied property lower than speculator absentee-owned property, because you don't want to encourage absentee owners to sort of be what the old British landlord class was in the old feudal times. You're becoming a feudal society. Yeah. And somehow people think they can get rich while they're becoming a feudal society, but it's not the kind of society that their children are going to be able to afford to live in.
I have another one that builds on Sad's idea of paradox, because you're right, there are many problems with the way that we've structured our home residential market, real estate market, so that real estate is become an investment vehicle. But it's not just for millionaire migrants, it's the same for local property owners. So many homeowners today are counting on the land value of their property for their retirement. That's their retirement plan. So what do you say to them, and would they support?
The world where that worked is over. It worked for 50 years after World War II. It doesn't exist anymore. Everybody would like a world that gives them a free lunch without working. That's everybody's dream. It's only available to the top 10% of the population who are insider dealings with the politicians. Unless you've contributed a lot of money to your local politician, that world is not open to you anymore.
So here's a question, and I guess the person asking of it is looking for your lessons from the 2008 experience in the States. So they're asking, if Vancouver's housing market crashed, what could or should the government do to bail out the people and not the banks?
Well, what was promised in 2008, two things. One was the banks had overlend. You had whole new words added to the English language. Junk mortgage. That didn't exist before. Ninja borrowers. No income, no jobs, no asset. Banks would just write loans knowing that there was no way the loans could be repaid, but they could find somebody really dumb enough to buy the loans, who trusted the banks. German local banks, because the Germans trust the banks, and pension funds, or they could just do crooked deals. So they essentially sold this to the pension funds. Meanwhile, these families had signed mortgages that had exploding interest rates that they couldn't pay. The idea was that the properties would be, the mortgage would be written down to the existing market value, or, and that with the market value defined as what was in line with the existing rental value of the property. So the homeowners who couldn't afford to pay would sell property at what it's supposed to be sold for in all the economics textbooks. You pay the mortgage pretty much the same price that you would pay for the rental value. The junk mortgage, mainly fraudulent mortgage. We're talking about what the FBI already in 2004 called the largest crime wave in American history. The crime wave were the banks. The banks in the United States are what my colleague Bill Black at the University of Missouri at Kansas City calls criminogenic, another new word that's been added to the English language to describe how banks operate. The banks would have taken a loss. Secondly, the most crooked bank was the most well-connected bank, the bank that controls the Democratic Party. It was Citigroup. Robert Rubin was President Clinton's Treasury Secretary, and he headed a Wall Street gang, essentially to come in and loot the banks and introduce, make the business plan basically fraud. And you can go to the University of Missouri, Kansas City economics website and read Bill Black's description of how the fraud worked. He was the prosecutor in the savings and loan scandal of the 1980s. What Sheila Bair, who was all bank deposits in America are insured by the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation that was headed by Sheila Bair. She wanted to close down Citibank and preferably throw the managers in jail. But Obama said, wait a minute, that's the Democratic Party. They're my campaign contributors. If they go to jail, who'll contribute to me? I'm there. Yeah, and he invited the banks to the warehouse, to the White House, and said, and said, trust me, I've got the blacks, I've got the workers, I'm the only guy standing between you and the crowd with the pitchforks, but I'm your guy. And this was posted on the, what he said on the White House site for 48 hours before it was taken down. So you know, his loyalty was to his campaign contributors. Sheila Bair wanted to take over Citibank and use it as a public bank. Imagine if it was bankrupt. It was broke. It had negative equity. And she said, look what it can do. It can issue credit card rates and not charge 29% late fees. It can provide basic banking services. A public-owned bank wouldn't make corporate takeover loans. A public-owned bank wouldn't make junk mortgages thinking that it could sell it to pension funds and German bankers. And the bagman for Obama and the Democratic Party was Tim Geithner, who was Secretary of the Treasury, who was a protege of Rubin, and he opposed everything that Sheila Bair was trying to do. And so Obama let the crooks get away with it and wrecked the American economy. And it amazes me that more Americans don't realize what a gangster he was.
So I've got a question here from someone who, similar to one I had when I was reading your book. So progressives historically have railed against high interest rates, you know, that have racked up government debt and discouraged, led to higher unemployment and so on. But you write about how it's actually low interest rates that have encouraged.
Well, in the past, you had a usury economy. High interest rates meant that borrowers had to pay much more interest to the banks. And that was when people thought the whole economy was based on income and expense, on national income. But after about 1980, everything changed. With Margaret Thatcher in England and Reagan in the United States, then wealth is now gained not by earning interest, but by making capital gains. The financial sector, it's true the banks make money on interest, but the financial sector as a whole makes money on capital gains, and these capital gains are financed by running deeper and deeper into debt, paying more and more interest, until all of the economy's economic surplus is paid in the form of interest and capital gains. When I went to work at Chase Manhattan Bank as their balance of payments economist in 1964. My first job for them was to look at how much money the bank could lend to Argentina, Brazil, and Chile. And I had to calculate how much of their exports over imports, how much of a balance of payments surplus could they generate. And the idea of the bank was that the 7 largest banks in America, the group of banks, would all lend Argentina, Brazil, and Chile enough money so that the interest would absorb all of the balance of payments growth. The bank's premise is that all economic growth should go to the bankers. This is neo-feudalism. This is finance now, today, playing the role that the landed aristocracy, hereditary aristocracy, played from the Middle Ages for 1,000 years in British history. And it seemed perfectly normal that the objective of economic growth in Latin America should be to pay Chase Manhattan and Citibank and a few other banks all of the growth and interest, leaving nothing for the people as a whole. They were treating Latin American population like the government's treating you Vancouver citizens today.
Let me ask the specific question this person asked, because I was sort of prefacing that. So they're saying low interest rates have helped people get a home and a mortgage, but as you're pointing out, it has these harmful impacts. So can you comment on where you see interest rates going or where they should go, but I would add to that, if they go back up, what do we do about the people who are in
Nobody
trouble
can
if that
figure
happens?
any way in which interest rates can go up. Normally, in every crash before, for the last 200 years, in America and every other country, the benefit of a crash has been that it wipes out the bad debts. But in this case, the debts are kept in place. So the prime directive of American financial policy is the banks must be saved. And they're willing to make the entire economy be destroyed in order to save the banks. And the banks will lose money. If interest rates go up, that lowers the amount of money that can be capitalized into a bank loan for the mortgages. If interest rates go up, bond prices will go down. Stock prices will go down. Corporate takeover loans will slow down. Housing prices will come down, and banks will go broke. So if they raise interest rates, the banks will go broke. So they leave essentially interest rates near zero, so that you continually to let hedge funds borrow cheaply from the banks and borrow to take over corporations and end up looting them. That's the business model of the financial sector today. You can achieve financially today what it took an army in the past. Every medieval country, England, France, Germany, they all sought to conquer other lands, but you needed an army to do that. But now you don't do that. Now you're able to do, with purely financial leverage, getting a country into debt what it used to take an army to do. So the European Union, for instance, can go to Greece and say, you owe us the money, and we will bankrupt we'll cut your banks off from the banking system and currency if you don't sell off your ports, sell off your roads, sell off your museums, sell off the islands, sell all of the property you have to pay the foreign creditors. And what's happened to Greece is a model for what's happening to every economy as a whole, not quite to the Greek position yet.
I have a question that builds on your example about the subway line in Manhattan. And it's a bit more Vancouver-centric. In Vancouver, we have a strategy that we want to be the greenest city in the world. And so there's some strategy around densification and building transit. But if you're saying that transit-oriented development is actually driving wealth inequality, and it's driving displacement unless there's proper equitable taxation, then should we first, is it okay, should we support expanding transit before fixing the tax system, or should we say no to transit expansion? How do we handle that?
Well, transit system has to be financed. The question is, how do you finance it? Now, you should if the transit system is going to do what it does in every other city and increase property values all the way around along the route, then either you can, if you must borrow, you issue a bond to be paid out of the increased tax revenues and property values that the transit system creates. Otherwise, there's no need to raise the transport prices. Ideally, transport should be provided freely. That's one way to get people. I can guarantee you your traffic problem and pollution would be much easier if you'd provide free transport, and it can all be paid for out of the increased value that the transit will create in real estate prices. It's a circular flow.
So there's one question here that I think a number of people probably have, which is, why does our federal government not borrow more to meet its needs, infrastructure needs, from its own Bank of Canada rather than for the private banks?
In other words, why doesn't the Bank of Canada do what it did in the 1930s and 1940s? And at that point, Canada could have just created its own money. This is exactly the problem that I wrote my book, Canada and the New Monetary Order, for the Institute for Research and Public Policy in 1979. The provinces of Canada needed money for their infrastructure. And so they were advised by the banks, especially, what's the most crooked bank in Canada? Nova Scotia. They were told that you could save 0.5% if you borrowed Swiss francs and German marks. And I said, that's crazy. Okay, you'll borrow a few $1 billion in francs and marks. What are they going to do? They're going to give to the Bank of Canada the francs and marks. And what's the Bank of Canada going to do? It's going to print Canadian dollars to give to the provinces, because the provinces are going to spend their money in Canadian dollars. Now, if this is what happens, why do you need the German and Swiss bankers at all? Why leave them out? Have the Bank of Canada do what it did. It's no more inflationary to print the money without getting the foreign exchange loan than it is to get the loan. And Scotiabank had a wonderful example. Our answer to that, he said, well, we're honest brokers. Well, when the banks are honest brokers, you know the politicians are crooks. Because that argument was the silliest thing I could think of. I said, look, the provinces decided need the money. The government's going along with it. They're not honest brokers. They're trying to do business. They're trying to rip you off by giving you a fake economic idea. So the result of that was I was removed from my position of financial advisor and made cultural advisor for the Department of State to talk about how do you make Canadians not think like Canadians. And we did a survey, the survey was, how do Canadians perceive the world? You have a wonderful natural resource that I don't know you realize, that almost all the comedians in Hollywood and North America come from Canada. And there's a reason for that. It's how do you cope with a society like that without developing a sense of humor? You know, otherwise you get depressed. Many of them are depressed, but they also become comedians. I don't know where to go with that.
Actually, let me ask this follow-up question from somebody else, but it gets to the politics behind why it unfolds the way you just described. Why do they let the private banks tell them?
Bribery, campaign contributions, bribery, blackmail, and crime.
So, okay, so then this person asked, so given that diagnosis, the diagnosis that you had, they say your diagnosis about the illnesses caused by the parasite economy is A+, but given the futility of the political system and the vested...
Futile. No, there have been revolutions.
Okay, all right, well maybe you're preempting the answer. So given the frustrations with the political system, the vested interests of the 0.1%, the hand-to-mouth existence of the bottom 30, what cure is there? What cure is there?
All of you to understand how the economy works and to make that a political issue, and to, all I can do is what I'm doing, trying to make it a political issue so people will realize it doesn't have to be this way. Margaret Thatcher was wrong. There is an alternative.
this one is around trying to understand how the problem came about or why. Many of these issues we're talking about today around real estate speculation are fairly recent. They started in the last, well, in Vancouver here, the last 10 years probably is when we've seen the most of the real estate price increases. But what changed? What happened in the last little while that drove that?
The whole world has been criminalized. In 1967, when I was still balance of payments economist at the World Bank, someone from the State Department who joined the World Bank showed me a memorandum. And this is during the Vietnam War. And the United States had a balance of payments deficit that it was trying to cure. And they asked me to calculate the amount of criminal capital in the world, because criminals are the most liquid people they are. The drug dealers keep their money in currency. And the State Department said, we want to make America the center of all the flight capital. So the State Department and the Pentagon went to Chase, and they asked David Rockefeller, can you please open a branch in the Caribbean? Because that's where most of the drugs are traded, and this will help the dollar. It'll help us win the Vietnam War. It'll help us pay for our, cover the balance of payments deficit, because we will win from England. It didn't work, but they tried. We'll win from England and Switzerland and get all the money that's going into Switzerland, all the money going into England can come for us to fight the war. So I calculated the criminal capital, and sure enough, most of the wealth in the world is held by criminals. And that was what the United States has set up, the system of offshore banking centers to support the value of the dollar, of sterling. It's bankrupted the Swiss economy that cannot do production anymore. Ciba Geigy, that I was a consultant for, ended up going out of business because so much criminal capital was going into Switzerland that it pushed up the value of the franc, and Ciba Geigy couldn't produce anything for sale because the cost of living was even higher than it is in Vancouver. So another example for you to avoid. So the amount of criminal capital in the world by Russian kleptocrats, post-Soviet economies, drug dealers, it's all spilled over to where can we put it safely. We want to diversify our holdings because they want to be prudent and not decriminalize their children and create a crime family, and just like the Norman invaders and the warlords who used to become the rulers of every country. So they buy property in New York, Miami, Vancouver, London. They spread spread it all over. So do you really want to be the hosts to the world's criminal capital? I can guarantee you there's a lot of foreign money coming in here was not earned by working in a factory.
So bringing it back to Vancouver real estate, this question I think is just looking for some more clarity on the mechanics of how we would capture more of that real estate rise. So how can dividends on the rise of real estate property values be collected and distributed?
Simple. Every city in the United States has property appraisers that appraise the market value of buildings and property. You can go online now, and there are online sites that can give you the value of property. It's very simple to base a tax on this value. I think that I'm told that the British Columbia has a wonderful database on the property values. They keep it to themselves and apparently do not share it with Vancouver unless you pay through the nose. And of course that shouldn't be the case. But once you know the value of the property, it's very simple to do just what America does in every other city of the world, except of course England, and tax the property value.
So using the BC Assessment Authority.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, this one is more educational. How do you know, or how can you separate the influence of increased demand for housing because of growing population and beauty and amenities in Vancouver from the impact of speculation?
It's not the population. For many years, China was the most popular, highest population in the world, and India. And housing was the lowest price there. It's not the population that creates a property value. It's what a bank will lend. Again, property is worth as much as a bank will lend, and they have to lend against what the borrower can pay. So it's how much the banks are able to squeeze out of the population that determines property prices, not population.
Okay, here's a question that I think is going to be some comedic relief. Any advice for a first-year economics PhD student?
Some schools are better than others, but my most imaginative students all dropped out of economics because they couldn't fit reality into the curriculum.
All right, they should probably be a little more optimistic. Can you give us more detail about what's happening in Hong Kong? Because a lot of people here don't know. How did they manage to put in their real estate tax, kind of roughly when it happened, and what are the lessons from Hong Kong that we can take here?
They did it as a colonial authority. They simply there wasn't much else they could base the tax system on. It's an island, it's a commercial island, and for the last actually 10,000 years, most trade of every country has been done in islands because almost every country has always wanted to keep trade and finance and commerce away from the domestic economy. So in Germany, the amber trade was done through Helgoland. Hong Kong was an island separate that was a commercial island. So there wasn't anything else to do, and it seemed logical. And in China, Sun Yat-sen was a follower of Henry George, who believed that China should introduce a land tax, and he was one of the most popular political leaders. He headed the Kuomintang for many years. Unfortunately, the party split in 1921 between the Communist Party and Chiang Kai-shek, who then ended up massacring the communists in Shanghai in 1927. But Hong Kong was able to, I didn't want to get off the track, essentially do it because it was the most obvious thing to do at that time, given what they saw in the West. And they saw that the trend of reform throughout the West in the late 19th century was all for a land tax. From Adam Smith and John Stuart Mill in England to Henry George in America, who went to Australia and England. The whole idea realized that and Marx also, by the way, that the role of industrial capitalism was to free society from the legacy of feudalism. You wanted that economies no longer needed a landed aristocracy that lived without working just off land rents. They no longer needed banks that simply made usury loans and loans that were not productive. They were going to bring banking into the industrial era by industrializing banking, as was done in Germany in the late 19th century. And the whole part of the world thought, we're now entering a century that will finally free society from feudalism. And World War I changed all that. The rentiers, the landlords, the bankers, the monopolists all fought back and were able to replace this classical economics with a kind of junk economics, a post-classical economics of Paul Samuelson, Krugman, that ilk.
Can I ask a follow-up question on this? And it relates to what you write about as well. I mean, there's so much wonderful economic history in your books, and one of the things I loved reading was, you go back to what all of these classical liberal economists actually wrote about the rentier class. Now, Iglika and I spend our time battling other think tanks who claim to be the legacy keepers of the Adam Smiths and the Ricardos. And so if you go speak for them, they give you an Adam Smith tie. Are they just willfully ignorant of the rentier critique of the Adam Smith and so on?
There's a reason that the history of economic thought is not taught in the curriculum anymore. Because if you read Adam Smith, you realize that he's saying exactly the opposite of what the people who cite his name is. Now, that's why I wrote J is for Junk Economics. Under letter A, you have Adam Smith. And what did Adam Smith say? He said he went to France, visited the physiocrats, and said the natural tax should be a tax on rent that if you don't tax the rent, then housing prices are going to go way up and enrich a class of landlords and the aristocracy. By the way, his sponsor in this trip was a Duke of Blocklow, which was the largest landowner in England. So it's ironic that Smith said, wait a minute, I'm going, my fees are being paid by the largest landowner, and now I'm saying, get rid of them, get rid of all the landowners. So Smith was against it. John Stuart Mill said, what is economic rent? It's what landlords make in their sleep. It's what they make without working and simply get a free lunch. Well, now instead, you have Milton Friedman saying there's no such thing as a free lunch. And the reality is that the economy is all about getting a free lunch. That's what's made Vancouver real estate so expensive. It's a free lunch. So you can, the people who you say support Adam Smith are basically University of Chicago boys. And what they realize is the first thing they did in Chile when they overthrew the government was, in addition to assassinating every major labor leader, every land reformer, they closed every economics department in Chile except for the Catholic University, where that taught University of Chicago theory. You cannot have a free market unless you have a totalitarian educational system and a totalitarian state. That's the genius that the free market has realized, that their system is so fake, so much of a falsifying how the world works, that you have to block any discussion of the idea of rent or interest being a free lunch. And that's why the Chicago graduates in their school control all of the major refereed economic journals in North America. Now suppose our graduates from Kansas City want to get a job. You're hired at the jobs they want are being a professor. You can't get promoted as a professor in the United States, and I'm sure it's in Canada too, unless you publish in the refereed journals. And the refereed journals are all controlled by the free market totalitarians. So you're out if you do anything to introduce reality into the curriculum.
Okay, I'm afraid I'm gonna take this back to very practical Canadian policy implications, because that's partly what I do. But during your talk, you spoke about several different mechanisms the government can do to capture the real estate and price increases. One was the land value tax, but another one was tax on capital gains. And then I noticed that here in answering your questions, you're focusing everything on the land value tax.
That's because 80% of capital gains are in the land. Even for corporations, the lands in the corporate stocks are mainly capital gains. So land is the largest resource in every economy. And as I said, 80% of bank loans in North America are mortgage loans. So because land and real estate are the largest asset in every economy, that's where most of the capital gains are.
So do you imagine the land tax as sort of a capital gains tax that you pay
Yes.
after you sell?
Yeah,
so
in
like
effect,
a transaction
in
tax?
effect, if you had a land tax, there wouldn't be the capital gains in land, and then so that 80% of the capital gains would all be captured. The rest would be stock market gains or rare art, junk art gains, Andy Warhols and things like that.
So you've talked about and written about how the banks are basically, the lending that they're doing isn't about new productive investment. It's primarily financing the transfer of property that already exists. It's not new. So I'm going to ask a controversial question from somebody that's controversial given who some of our co-sponsors are, which is that, is what you say about banks equally true of credit unions and other financial institutions?
Well, credit unions don't create money. Banks create money on a computer keyboard. If you go into a bank and take out a loan, the bank will have you sign an IOU. So you have the bank has created a deposit for you. And you've given an IOU to the bank, so it has an asset against this deposit that it can then borrow from the Federal Reserve or hold. So basically, it's loans create deposits. Now, this is very hard to explain to most people. Money and banking for most people is a kind of a psychodrama, and it's the tendency is to think that banks, people deposit the money in the banks and they lend it out. That's not what banks do. That's what credit unions do. It's what savings banks do. But a bank will simply create credit on its computer keyboard and out of nothing. Now the fact is the government can do this just as well, but it creates the money for something else. It doesn't. A government public banking would not create corporate takeover loans, junk mortgages, or predatory lending, and they wouldn't charge monopoly rates for credit cards or interest rates as they do.
Okay.
So I've got a question here from someone who's not feeling very hopeful from what you have to say, Michael. So how do you educate the masses if, with corruption and wealth and greed, if they all drive the message, and people like Donald Trump end up getting elected, how do we actually challenge all of that? P.S. Thanks for the pen.
Only public education can do it. In the late 19th century, it's amazing. If you read the newspapers and the pamphlet literature, people had to work much longer hours in the 19th century. It was really hard to be a wage earner back then, and yet they were much more political. And politics is all about economics. And somehow the political parties today don't talk about economics. And Trump didn't really talk about economics except to say you're worse off than you were before, throw the bastards out. And the result is people can keep throwing the bastards from party A to party B out. But as I think the President Nyerere of Tanzania said, America is so rich that instead of just having a single party rule like we have in Africa, they can have two parties. But essentially they do the same thing. So you have to have an alternative to that. And it's very hard because the media are not going to cover you. That's why Bernie Sanders didn't want to start a third party. He to be as ignored as the other people. So the internet is a great help, but there has to be some popular base, popular movement that is going to make economic policy, and especially tax policy and financial policy, a political issue, where it's not into the political discussion today. You have an agreement of all the parties that the 10% should benefit at the expense of the 90%.
Okay, I have another one around the education. But so all this capital piling into real estate investment is because regular normal investments like bonds and stocks suck as investments. You know, so why? So is this more about, well, they're saying that the returns are so much higher on real estate, and so that's why people are planning on financing their retirement through buying a house. So what is going on with the economy that people feel like they can't really make money, that the interest rate basically is so low that saving doesn't pay off, and the only thing you can do is try to gamble on real estate in the hopes of getting a pension?
You put it in a nutshell. One of my students at Kansas City did a research in the families that have gone bankrupt in Kansas City. And almost by far the bulk of examples of they went bankrupt gambling. Because in the river near Kansas City, there's a gambling boat. And that actually was, at the first glance you think, well, wait a minute, don't they know that the casino always wins? And Wall Street's a casino, by the way. Aren't they stupid to gamble? But the fact is, they know that they're stuck. There's no way they can get out of the situation unless God intervenes and helps them. And they think, I'll gamble. And one person even told me this, that he'd lived a good life, he deserved something, and if God couldn't come and give him a bag full of money, but if he would buy the lottery ticket, then God could sort of help him win that way. And they're so desperate that that is the only way they can get. The fact is, the free lunch is over. The economy that made your parents rich does not exist for you. You have to realize that it's ended. The economy has expanded to its limit of the ability to create more wealth, because you're driving a car with the feet on the brake, and the brake is the volume of debt that is siphoning off all of the economic surplus and creating debt deflation. My books go into all of the details and have charts and spell it all out, but that's the whole problem. It's hard to realize that you can't live as well as your parents and grandparents lived, and it seems unfair that you should have to work so much harder when productivity's gone up so high and the economy's so much richer. Why aren't you doing better? And that's why so many people are feeling depressed, why so many people are going on opioids and drugs and getting bad. But you have to realize the game is over, and that's very hard for people to realize, that it's not going to get better. That's part of reality economics.
And as a follow-up on that, then I guess this suggests to me that we need a more fundamental rethinking of our economic structure besides just taxing real estate. Like, what else do we need to look at, perhaps, in the way we structure our economy?
Natural resources, especially here in British Columbia. Water, the forests, all the natural resources you have are just like land. Do you really want this to be privatized and just given away? The natural resources are your patrimony, as they're called in many countries. The natural resources rent the value of your forests, and your water and your oil and your gas and your minerals should be used to make the economy rich, not simply to let it be siphoned off by a financial rentier class. And that's what you're letting happen. And just look at what happened under Yeltsin in Russia, and you'll see you're creating the same kind of kleptocracy here that the post-Soviet economies created, all in the name of free markets.
So we only have time for a couple of more questions. Should there be an additional tax on homes that are absentee owned?
Yes, absolutely, because you don't want the economy to become an absentee-owned economy. That turns the rest of you into the equivalent of what serfs were in the medieval period. The difference is that serfs were tied to the land, and now you can live anywhere you want, but wherever you live, you're going to have to pay all the income over subsistence for housing. So your situation is not that much different.
I guess I want to ask a question that I'm trying to wrap a bunch of the questions together, because a lot of them are looking for political advice rather than economic advice. You've just lived through the U.S. election, where, interestingly, you had Trump and the alt-right speaking to a lot of these anxieties about Wall Street and so on, but taking it in a particular direction. I suppose, Stan.
No, I don't think they voted for Trump. The most unpopular, you had in the American election the two most unpopular politicians in American history running at the same time. I don't think they voted for Trump. I think they voted against Hillary, because when she said, "Aren't you better off than you were in 2008?" Trump said, "Look, you're not better off. Her constituency is better off, but not you white men." And that struck a chord.
Do you think if Sanders had won the nomination?
What?
If Sanders had won the nomination?
Yes, Sanders absolutely would have won.
And I guess a bunch of these questioners are really asking about
By the way, every poll that was done from January to June showed that Sanders would defeat Trump and that Hillary would lose. So Hillary then spent $1 billion getting pollsters that would say, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the most beautiful of all," that's saying that she would win, and change it all. But the fact is, all these early polls were right. And the Democratic National Committee knew that she would lose. They would rather lose with Hillary than win with Bernie Sanders, because they're the Robert Rubin wing, the Wall Street wing of the Democratic Party.
So a number of the questioners are ultimately asking you about what faith you have in the political system. Can this actually be achieved through education and democratic process versus in the time that we have.
I don't see an alternative. I mean, you can't have an armed revolution because the state has the monopoly of force. There's really no alternative but to act politically. I guess you're in the position of the Christians in Rome when the creditors had bankrupted the Roman economy, and if you read Livy and Diodorus and Plutarch, they all blamed the decline of Rome on the creditor class, and there wasn't any solution except to withdraw into religion. This generation is stuck.
Thanks, Michael. Well, we're going to have to wrap this formal part because we actually have to clear out of the Rio Theater in time
Or we
for
could just
their...
sit here and go on and not clear out.
Well, or watch the next movie. I'm not sure what the next movie is, but they do have another movie. I want to thank you on behalf of all of the co-sponsors. I want to first of all thank BCGU, which really had the lead in bringing you here. For all the other organizations that Stephanie mentioned who co-sponsored this with us. And the timing of your visit is good. You're identifying a bunch of stuff that we're wrestling with, which is we are living at this odd time where our taxes are historically and relatively low, and yet everyone feels squeezed. And your work is capturing how much what we pay in rent or in mortgage payments is squeezing out both the productive economy and our capacity to pay for things together, as well as driving up these housing prices and causing these long-term trends. So I want to thank you for making the trip and sharing all of this with us. And I wanted to end just in enough time so that people have time to. We have a number of Michael's books on sale just through that door, and and we may have time for Michael to sign some of those, but we got to clear out of here by 9 o'clock. So thank you all for coming. Thanks for your interest, and thanks again to the co-sponsors, and have a good evening, everyone.